All right, I am sewing and I felt like talking about this. So, I just saw a video from a mutual of mine, and it was about apparently some recent commentary that T.S. Madison has had about white trans women. Now, I could stand to look into this commentary. I don't know what is said. So, most of what I'm saying is based off of the video I saw. So, maybe it's because of who I am as a person at my core and the way that I've moved through the world. I but I've always granted the premise that other people can make me look bad, maybe, in terms of like that being something that a very small-minded person would feel, right? But personally, and maybe this is still the pick me part of my brain, who knows? I think it's pretty easy to set yourself apart. This particular trans woman was talking about trans women who try and how the trans women who don't try are usually white trans women. Now, if I were to really quickly give you a theory about that, I would say that white trans women are kind of like a continuation of white feminism, in that what are a lot of women right now trying to fight for, right? Breaking away from, a lot of the expectations of them that are placed on them by, their designation, their sex designation, right? That's what a lot of cis women are fighting against, working against, right? So naturally, I think for a lot of white trans women, that's going to continue into these. I agree. This perspective I agree with, where women are not supposed to be, or they should not be held to this beauty standard where essentially your womanhood is the reward for you participating appropriately, right? That's not really that's not really something I think is okay, right? That is, of course, though, the thing that's being suggested when people talk about trans women not trying, right? And you could have a deeper conversation that's sort of related to this about why is it that Black trans women try? Why is it that Black cis women tend to show up a certain way? Why is it that Black cis women often feel like they can't be bummy, so to speak, right? Like for me, for example, I don't like leaving the house not looking a certain way. And I know for a fact that that comes from my history of internalizing anti-Blackness that would project a negative idea onto me if I didn't show up a certain way, right? And so I think Black trans women, and I would say trans women of color in general, even if they are positioned to stand against these colonized perspectives of gender, they're in a situation where, because they're not granted womanhood in the same way that white women are, they functionally feel the need to go above and beyond in order to counteract that narrative, right? You could say that, right? I think that's pretty accurate and very observable. Intellectually, I can understand the mentality of feeling like someone who is a trans woman but not trying, so to speak, is making you look bad. Intellectually, that is something that makes sense to me. It tracks that someone would feel that way to me. What doesn't exactly track to me is the idea that it is factually true. And again, who knows? Maybe this is because of my little lingering pick-me shit in the back of my brain. But I know that a trans woman who isn't trying, right, doesn't really have an impact on my life. I'm just going to be blunt with you. Like her being clocky ain't got nothing to do with me being clocky. And who knows, maybe we both clacky. But either way, the trans women who try, in my opinion, are always going to be the trans women who are obviously not going to be seen in the same way as the trans women who don't try, right? Now, for me, one of the frustrations I have with this conversation is, what is trying? Is trying shaving your skull down to fit a white Eurocentric beauty standard? Is trying wearing makeup to evoke this image of you being aroused? Is trying this obligation to put makeup on your face so that you can seem pleasant to every person who interacts with you? I think when you unpack those things, you have to think about the fact that most of those things are just misogyny. And I think the unfortunate, uncomfortable truth that some trans women don't always want to acknowledge is that outside looking in, right? For a lot of cis women, the discourse around this is just misogynistic, you know? And I'm not saying you got to live for the cis lens, but I'm trying to say, like, a lot of the trans women that I think, from my perspective, would like to see themselves as being very aligned with cis women, right? A lot of times, I don't always think they recognize some of the sort of misogynistic shit that they've internalized, right? Women don't need to perform femininity for no one. Of course, trans women are under a set of very different factors, right? There are a lot of very distinctly different factors that a transgender woman is facing versus a cis woman, right? And obviously for a trans woman, she's going to be rewarded for performing femininity appropriately, in quotations. But all that aside, it's still worth unpacking, what does that mean? What does it mean to perform sexuality, gender, womanhood appropriately? What does it mean to try? And I think as you try to narrow those things down, you're still going to be left with a list of largely misogynistic things. I have a hard time understanding the logic of, I've talked about Lily Tino a couple times because I think she's a good example of this, how Lily Tino can impact my life. Seriously. You know, like, frankly, you know, again, maybe I'm privileged, but I don't have a lot of negative experiences in society as a trans woman. I don't have a lot of conflicts with strangers about me being a trans woman, right? It's not a thing that happens. I don't, you know, do a lot of the things that Lily Tino does. We're very different types of trans women, right? And I know personally that the reason our lives are functionally different is that we are seen very differently in our society. Yes, Lily Tino is a privileged white trans woman, sure. I know that when I'm, you know, and I hate to do this, it's like when I stand next to Lily Tino, I know that society is more likely to reward me for femininity than they are to reward her for femininity, if that makes any sense. I'm trying to figure out a nice way of saying this. So I don't understand how someone who's sitting in that position where they know that they're trying, they know that society can see that they're trying, I don't understand why they're so invested in the transitions of people who aren't trying. Because here's the thing. They know that society is not going to see them a certain way. And many white trans women are trying to go against that. Personally, for me, I think it's easy to set yourself apart from that, especially when you're a black trans woman. I don't feel bogged down at all by what white trans women are doing, even remotely. Do I understand why it would cause people to feel sort of these feelings of scarcity and insecurity and this desire to attack what's different? Sure. I get it. I don't know what it got to do with me, though. And I want for more trans women to start thinking a little bit more like that. You're not really going to be affected by someone else not being